Hi, Natalie. I'm back.
We're live.
Cool.
Hey, Karina. How are you?
Good, and you, Ryan?
I'm good, thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm in need of a haircut here.
Me too.
Yeah.
Let's not get started about grooming. It's interesting 2 months. That's all I'll say.
Are any of you at the point where you consider doing it yourself?
Oh, yes.
Okay. No?
I don't know if I'm that desperate.
Okay.
I'm at, I've come to the point of just kind of like the acceptance stage, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe I start looking, okay, woman, that's okay. Be me as I am.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Our room is starting to fill up. So far, we have about 272 people with us today.
Welcome.
Yes, we're very excited to have this conversation.
I hope everyone's enjoying their lunch. I apologize if you hear growling in the background. I don't have any honest dog. It's just I'm probably quite hungry.
I hope you have a big lunch prepared after this, Ryan.
I do.
I hope my husband's making me something.
Yes, this is one of those days that I feel like we all need a platter of something to arrive.
Yeah.
I'm going to give this another 2 minutes or so just to allow for more people to join us, and then we can kick off.
Hair's great. Thank you, Patty. Very kind of you to say.
Hello, everyone from Italy. How lovely. There's someone from the UK.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Hello, Christopher Villa. From Port Elizabeth, we have a guest. Oh, this is actually so fun. From Durban, from sunny Durban. Oh, I'm very jealous. It's so overcast here today. I wish I had more sun.
Well, talk about sun. Debbie from Dubai. How sunny are things there?
We've got Botswana in the room. This is exciting. Gosh. Kalk Bay around the corner. Hout Bay as well is in the room. Muizenberg, Pretoria, Durban. We have pretty good representation, I'd say.
From Benoni. Hey, Shelley from Benoni.
Straight out of Benoni. Hello, neighbor or ex-neighbor. All right, cool. I think we're good to go. We have about 336 people and counting that have joined us today. So I think let's begin. Welcome everyone to this GetSmarter sponsored Mail and Guardian webinar. My name is Natalie Williams, Senior Director of Communications and Engagement at WA, and I'll be moderating today's webinar session on e-learning in a COVID-19 world. So e-learning has changed the way that COVID-19 rather, has changed the way we experience the world, and the education sector has not been immune. We've moved from physical locations and classrooms to virtual lessons and downloadable notes. And I think it's fair to say that it's been a steep learning curve for many involved. Over the past 12 years, GetSmarter has developed a deep understanding of workplaces, careers, and skills. And during the development of our courses, we identify skills gaps and across different industries, and have developed content to address the changes that the future of work will bring. We've analyzed the careers, motivations, and skills-based needs of thousands of students. And so we're well positioned to provide insights into how this could play out in the future. Last year in November, so November 2019, we conducted some research and reached over 8,000 professionals across 106 countries. And then in conjunction with previous insights gathered from over our 100,000 students, we found that 50% of our respondents have already experienced significant levels of change in their jobs in the last 18 months. And almost 55% of our respondents indicate that they're anticipating significant levels of change to occur in their jobs in the next 18 months. I think we can all attest to that. We find ourselves in one of those moments of change. Respondents perceive that the biggest driver for change, no surprise, is technology. And that's related to both the previous 18 months and the next 18 months. So even though technology is perceived to be the driver for change, the resulting sought-after skills are uniquely human. Skills most sought after by employers are analytical and critical thinking, interpersonal skills, and leadership skills. We see in our data that across all generations, all seniority levels, and all managerial levels, there's a widespread acknowledgement that leadership, a uniquely human talent, has become the most sought after and most valuable skill for the future. I guess now is the future. And I think we can all attest to this COVID-19 era that leadership has certainly been one of the most important factors of what's kept us grounded and moving forward in many cases. So I think we can all agree with the outcome of that data. So in the room with us today, we have Ryan Omani, Managing Director of 2U GetSmarter, David Claassen, Senior Director of Learning Experience, and Karina Bean, Director of Product Strategy and Research. And we're coming to you live from wherever the lighting is best. So before we get into this conversation, I would like to just mention a few housekeeping notes. You as the audience won't have access to speak to us directly, but you are more than welcome to type your comments and questions in the chat. We will certainly do our best to address these questions during the webinar, but if we're not able to get to it during the webinar, we'll certainly endeavor to get to them at the end, should we have extra time. We are recording the session, so this webinar will be available to you. Mel Garden will share this with you in the coming days. And then lastly, in about 10 to 15 minutes, you'll see a poll come up in your chat. And our poll question today, we really want to get a sentiment check from you all. So our poll question today is, what is your key sentiment right now with regards to e-learning in South Africa amid the COVID-19 pandemic? Again, I'll repeat that question. What is your key sentiment right now with regards to e-learning in South Africa amid COVID-19? So you'll see that question come up in your chat, and you'll have multiple choice, so you can just select whichever one is most pertinent to you. Okay, great. And we'll look at those poll results closer to the end of the webinar. Without further ado, I'm going to bring our guests into this conversation. And I'll start with you, Ryan. Could you share with our audience who GetSmarter is and how our journey in South Africa began?
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Ryan. Thanks, Natalie. So GetSmarter, we're a brand of 2U, which is a leader in global edtech business, which is listed in NASDAQ in the United States. And 2U partners with top-tier universities around the world to offer online degrees, both graduate and undergraduate degrees, coding boot camps, and through GetSmarter, which is our business, online short courses. We have a Cape Town office of over 700 strong, and this remains the home base for all GetSmarter short course operations. GetSmarter itself was founded in 2008. It was a family business founded by the Paddock brothers, Sam and Rob. And this was started 12 years ago. So it was actually before the MOOC revolution. So we would regard ourselves as veterans in this online education space. From very near the start, we've been working with the University of Cape Town and really proving ourselves in delivering high quality courses that are relevant to working professionals who are looking to thrive in an ever-changing world. Now, what is interesting, in about 2016, universities around the world, they saw what we were able to achieve in this space. And when they looked for a partner to take their offerings online, they chose us down here in Cape Town. So again, this validates the kind of work that we've been doing here. So now these days, we partner and collaborate with top-tier universities around the world. And this includes 6 of the world's top 10 universities and the top university in Africa. So schools from universities like Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, MIT, Yale, London School of Economics, and University of Cape Town. They all partner with us. And during our time, we've had over 100,000 people, 100,000 students from more than 159 countries around the world. Now, every time I look at the list of countries, it's like a geography lesson. I bring my son in and try find it on the map in our garage. But really a lot of students from all over the world, and many of them have actually taken more than one courses. I was recently introduced to a student of ours who's taken 12 of our courses, so true lifelong learners.
Amazing, thank you, Ryan. 12 courses. I wish I had the time. I maybe do actually have the time right now. So. Could you also explain, Ryan, briefly describe the business model, and would you say, the second part of that question is, would you say it's disrupting the education sector in South Africa?
Cool, thanks, Nats. Our business model is fairly simple. We partner with universities, and effectively we provide them with a bundle of services to enable them to develop online programs and courses, We help them run marketing and to enroll students for these courses. And then finally, we provide the platform and the support for the students to actually take the courses. The second part of your question, I wouldn't say that we're disrupting the education sector in South Africa. I think that we're actually helping universities and students take advantage of this digital medium, really helping them to create offerings that just were not available before this. I think that this allows universities to reach many more people than they ever could beforehand. And I think it also allows thousands of people around the world to experience the high quality that these universities offer. So that's
online education. So online education, the way that we do it, is a response to disruption, but not necessarily the disruptor itself.
I think so.
And what would you say the benefits and values are of online education for educators and learners?
Okay, well, I mean, there's some obvious benefits. You know, you can study from your own home, you can study at your own pace when it suits you, you can study around your other commitments like your kids or other things you've got to do. You can study in your slippers. And one of the benefits now is that the operations and the study for the students wasn't impacted by COVID-19. But I think that there's other benefits. It allows you to develop something entirely new. So like the development and the ongoing presentation of online courses means you can offer things that weren't possible beforehand. For example, you can take a fintech course that's got a focus on entrepreneurship. That might require guest speakers from actual fintech companies, industry experts. And in an on-campus environment, that might not be possible. There might be logistical barriers to it, which makes it prohibitively expensive. Whereas the way that we develop an online course, it means that you could develop the content up front, and the ongoing presentation actually allows you to bring in all the views from these experts. But really, I mean, there's the other benefits for you. Karina, you've done a lot of research on our students. I mean, perhaps you can tell us more about the value of online learning for students.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Everything you said is true, and I would add, and perhaps this is an obvious statement, students want to walk away with something that's their intended value gain, right? We call it jobs to be done at GetSmarter. And so across all categories and industries, students want to learn real-world applications. So think those fintech industry experts that you mentioned. It's not always easy to get them into the offline classrooms. And decades of research tells us that people learn best when they are learning by doing and thinking about what they are doing. So paying attention to what learners are feeling is also critically important. You can think of these three interconnected points as a framework for effective teaching and learning. So doing, thinking, and feeling. I believe David will elaborate on this a little more later. But in essence, what this means is that learning is fostered by reinforcing these loops of action and reflection. But without the right kinds of action and reflection, it can be slow and unsuccessful. So to be effective, educators should help learners engage in the types of action and reflection that lead to productive cognitive processing, help them avoid cognitive overload, and maintain the motivation and positive feelings that will keep learners engaged with the process of learning. So the value really of online learning for students is that technology enables us to design these loops of reinforced action and reflection independent from or without over-reliance on the instructors or the teachers. So they become independent students and of course the feeling that they get from learning as well.
Thank you, Karina. I want to shift the conversation ever so slightly and chat a bit about the urgent and, of course, rising need for e-learning in South Africa during this pandemic and beyond. So, David, I'm going to come to you for this one. Could you speak to how critical this move online has become?
Sure, Natalie. I think the first important point to note is that e-learning or online education is somewhat different from most of what's been happening in response to the pandemic. What many educational institutions and educators have been pursuing at this time can be classified as remote education or remote teaching and learning. So this is where something that would otherwise have happened in a face-to-face or physical setting has been moved online. And the rapid pace at which this has happened is understandable, given the panic that COVID-19 has induced, and also the need for the teachers and educators to salvage the academic year. But remote learning hasn't specifically been designed for the online environment. it is a temporary arrangement, and educational institutions and educators know this too. By contrast, e-learning has been consciously designed for the digital space. So with remote learning, you're finding substitutions for what you otherwise would have done in an in-person classroom or setting, which is why it sometimes comes off as second best or can be perceived as being a lower quality experience. Whereas with e-learning, you're actually redefining how teaching and learning can happen, since you're designing for an online first learning experience. It's what we've been doing at GetSmarter for a long time now. It's an important distinction for parents, learners, and educators for that matter, to understand, because it should give them the sense then that so much more is actually possible when the necessary consideration and intent goes into online education. So for all of those sort of different people, e-learning should provide the assurance that the online learning experience can be just as effective and as rich as face-to-face teaching, though this can be subject and discipline dependent.
Thank you, David. I think that's an important distinction to just clear up. Remote learning is taking existing content intended for a classroom setting or a lecture hall setting, taking existing content and making that available online, whether in downloadable notes, etc., where e-learning considers the medium and how we consume information online, not just the what, but the what and the how. Important distinction that before this conversation I had not necessarily thought of. When I come to you, with best practices in mind, what guidance could you offer when it comes to designing and developing e-learning materials and courses?
So as I've alluded to earlier, Natalie, I think it's important to first and foremost consider who you need to design for, right? So attitudes towards learning differ, and therefore learner motivations will be different. So it can't be a one-size-fits-all approach to designing a course or learning in general. Predisposition, the feeling that I mentioned earlier towards learning, is not always equally well felt, irrespective of the quality of course design. But understanding this predisposition means that you can account for this in the design of your course material prior to delivering it. So, for example, think of individuals who never had the opportunity to attend a university before, someone who only attended school up to grade 10, for argument's sake. Compare this person to someone who had the opportunity to attend a Harvard or Oxford. Attitude towards learning will be very different. The result, the influences, the experiences will mean that the feeling towards learning will be different. So online platforms allows us to better account for this feeling in course development and design, which helps us and instructors to better address such predispositions. And this ultimately leads to better student satisfaction and better results in mastery of skills. But if I'm being completely honest, I think David is the real expert here. David, would you mind elaborating a little bit more on the mastery and the skills there?
Sure, I'm happy to do it in relation to the framework that you've already introduced around effective teaching and learning. And I think perhaps the easiest way to go about this is to separate it out into those three core things. So doing, thinking, and feeling. So to begin with the first aspect of that, doing. Sometimes, though not always, in order to do something really well or proficiently, learners first need to be taught how best to do it. So they need instructional content that effectively delivers that knowledge. Once they have that knowledge, they need to feel confident that they can apply it in new contexts they have yet to encounter. So by way of example, think of adult learners who want to learn a second language. It would be impossible to teach them every single sentence that they'll ever come across. So what educators do instead is they teach the underlying rules of the language that determine how sentences can be structured. The learners, from a grammar book, dictionary, and through engagement in different situations, increase their vocabulary. And then they combine that vocabulary knowledge with the underlying rules of the language to generate sentences of their own. Ultimately, this makes them proficient speakers in the language over time. So in the space of a physical classroom, you can easily see how that plays out. The learner is reading from a set book. They can listen to the pronunciation of the educator, and they practice their conversational skills with their peers who may be sitting next to them. Of course, technology can support and facilitate all of those activities if you just think about the affordances of Zoom. But the important thing to note here is that in that in-person setting, that connection between what learners need to know and what they need to do is almost immediately apparent. For online learning, it's important to ensure that the connection between the knowledge that's being imparted and its application is as clear as well. I think a good way to do this is by making clear to learners the skills or competencies that they will possess having worked through a lesson and engaged in opportunities to practice what they've learned. We call these learning outcomes, and a couple of sort of key features of them are that they should be meaningful and authentic in the sense that they're transferable to the real world. They should also be measurable, so you can actually assess the effectiveness not only of the learning, but of the teaching as well. This is useful for creating a link between what a learner has been taught and what they need to do to demonstrate their knowledge. So learning outcomes give direction to educators and learners alike. They also help to incentivize learning in a way which helps to keep learners motivated. Overall, this principle is known as instructional alignment, and it's sort of easily keyed into doing.
And Dave, just for someone like me, you could give us some practical examples of how we do this online. Like how do these learning outcomes come to life?
Oh, sure. You're making a determination about what exactly the learner needs to do to demonstrate that they've got mastery in a certain skill. So the advice that we typically give to a faculty member, for example, or university partner as a whole, would be to use an active word, so a verb, to very clearly articulate what it is that the learner needs to do. You're putting that up front so that the learner, when they're engaging with the actual didactic material or instructional material, they know what it is that their end goal is, what they're working towards. And then you're asking them to do that exact thing in the form of an assessment.
Great, thanks.
Cool. I think another key principle worth considering under doing would be desirable difficulty. And it's predicated on this idea that people learn better when learning takes a bit of effort. And this is because the difficulty helps promote long-term retention and the transfer of those skills, as we mentioned, to new contexts. It's a concept, I suppose, that's deployed really effectively in another online context, which is gaming. I don't know if there are any gamers on this call or webinar, but if you think about it does, because it illustrates this principle really, really well, I think. If you just think about how invested people get in mastering a level within a game. It's usually because they're trying to unlock a more challenging level. One way to bring this concept to eLearning is to actually invert the lesson or the lecture that you're providing. So instead of providing learners with the knowledge they need to perform a task, have them try the task or try to perform the task and provide them with a solution only afterwards. This kind of action is ideal and should be then paired with reflection so that they can actually think through why it is they approached the problem or the challenge in that way. And it will also help them to spot any sort of core assumptions that was at the heart of what it is that they tried to do unprompted.
I told you he was the expert.
Not get waylaid with this. I think we mentioned so doing. The second key principle then would be thinking, and I think a principle that might be good to focus on here, that might be particularly illustrative, is formative feedback. So the input that an instructor or peer provides to a learner in order to indicate an area for improvement. This allows learners to gauge how well they're doing and, if needed, to course correct, and they know where they need to course correct. So this kind of feedback ideally should be crafted for the purpose of helping the learner to improve. A practical way to do this, and one that we often deploy, is to design and develop not only the formal graded assignment, but also a series of practice assignments along the way, affording learners a low-stake opportunity to test their knowledge and receive some feedback. If the input is clear, actionable, and timely, fantastic, because it's then an opportunity for learners to, they then get an opportunity to show what it is that they've learned in that formal assignment. Perhaps I'll move to the final sort of aspect, which flows sort of more readily. And the central idea around that just a reminder, the third point was feeling. The central idea around that is that people learn best when they feel motivated and positively disposed towards learning as well. And the great thing, I suppose, about this, the interconnectedness of the framework, is that if you've adhered to the principles in doing and thinking, it will almost certainly result in positive feeling. But just to sort of illustrate this by way of example, a very compelling thing that educators can do is shift from a focus on performance to one that's actually on mastery. And what we mean by that is the relevance of a skill or competency should be clear to the learner beyond the assessment that they're going to take. So the research suggests that learners are more motivated when they understand and can relate the value of what they're learning to the real world. And as most educators know, not all learners are going to arrive at the same level of competency necessarily by the time that a test or exam is taken. So while it is important that they perform well on the assessment, by encouraging mastery instead, you'll be promoting a growth mindset among learners, this idea of continual improvement that then in turn leads to a desire or appetite for lifelong learning. And that is a lesson that learners can carry with them beyond the educational context in which they're in.
Thanks for that summary, David. Gosh, there's a lot of information in there, and I'm sure you could keep going, and there's more to unpack, but it certainly has taught me something about how I've learned. And if I reflect on some of the skills that I've picked up along the years, it does, tend to follow this framework in one way or another. Karina, with your research on students, could you touch on what you found keeps learners stimulated and engaged? I know this will be a question that some of our audience would be interested in. I've seen one or two questions come in about the lack of engagement or the lack of a personal touch. So if you can speak to us about what you have found keeps our learners stimulated and engaged while online learning.
Now, before I answer your question, just getting back to the gaming, I'm not a gamer, but I keep thinking of playing Mario Bros when I was younger and leveling up and mastery of skills. And while David was talking, leveling up, lifelong learning. But to get back to your question, Natalie, I think it's important to mention first at this stage that e-learning, like you summarized so nicely early on, is not just about convenience of learning online. Irrespective of the subject and discipline, it makes quality education available to individuals who previously would not have been able to attend these institutions of learning. And Ryan mentioned in the introduction that we at GetSmarter and eLearning, it's not about disrupting education per se, but rather it's a response to the disruption that we all are experiencing. Where there's a need for a practical component within the e-learning design or the online education, this can be designed into the curriculum. So for example, 2U offers grad programs, and one of the popular ones is in nursing. And there's no way that you can teach nursing without a practical component to it. Somewhere along the line within the design of a nursing degree, you will have to have a practical component. Similar to short courses, we have leadership short courses. You will have to have a component where leadership skills can be taught via live sessions, live interaction coaching sessions, and the tools that you can use, technological tools, Zoom, you can weave that in. That said,
just to chip in, Karina, like one of the questions from Wellington earlier was like, how do you stage online learning for occupational skills like welding, etc.? I think this is the idea around how you can bring a practical component into the design of the course. Mm-hmm.
For sure. It's not about taking, like David said, it's not about taking everything online. It's about mastering skills, and technology facilitates that. But by no means just taking everything online and not taking into account the subject matter or the skills that needs to be mastered in a different way. That's it. Like I said, some of the strategies for keeping learners stimulated online include problem-based learning, so providing them with real-world problems or challenges to work through that require application of the material you need teaching. So this could be gamification. Social learning is another way. So seeking opportunities for your learners to construct their own knowledge through social engagement with their peers, This really creates a social safe space. For example, having the entire class vote on a poll, similar to what we're doing now with a poll, and discussing the results in a small group afterwards.
And Karina, just maybe while you're on social learning, like one of the key things is around the accountability to peers. And so oftentimes what we found with e-learning or remote learning is oftentimes the student might feel isolated. So putting them into a social context ensures that they've got accountability to actually stay on track for whatever their course of studies is. Would that be another factor to this?
Sorry, can I interject there? Sorry. I think another sort of good illustration of that is in the workplace itself. If you're a working professional on this call, you likely, when you've got a question about a process that you're unfamiliar with, you wouldn't necessarily go immediately to your direct line manager. You might go to your peer instead and ask them, just because there's more sort of comfort, less concern about any sort of punitive or corrective action.
For sure. And then the last one, exploratory learning. So including links to multimedia and other resources that are relevant, that go beyond the syllabus. So it'll situate their studies in the real world, give broader meaning to it. An example here, case studies that are highly relevant to specific points in time. Any examples that you can think of, David?
Not immediately, though I think we should be careful to ensure that when we speak of e-learning programs, we don't only have in mind synchronous sort of engagement, so instruction on Zoom, but also asynchronous learning, so activities that learners can do on their own time at their own pace. Synchronous engagement is important, but it's just one component of a well-considered learning experience. In the present context, asynchronous learning gives learners a lot of much-needed flexibility. It almost allows people to exert control over an element of their lives. This is something that sort of works well for adults who need to multitask and move between different sort of online spaces. But it may be something that's new to, for example, school-going children. So it's a skill that will need to be honed and learned.
Thank you for adding that, David. I can't agree with you more. Natalie?
Great, yeah. So far we have discussed this from a point of view of student experience, but what about the considerations for teachers and instructors? And I know many of our guests today are teachers and instructors. I also see many people concerned about their kids in this scenario. But David, I'll come back to you on this one. How can we ensure that our educators are equipped and proficient in implementing their successful virtual learning programs?
Well, I think the first point to make clear from our side is that we're experts in adult online education. So while many of the concepts and the frameworks we spoke to sort of earlier, they can certainly apply in other sectors of education, and the research would suggest that they would. We can only really speak to adult learning because that's where our experience really has been grounded and formed. We can speak to how we've worked with university faculty members, for example, taking their sort of deep subject matter expertise and translating their vision into a well-designed course. By way of example, it's something that we're very clear on in the initial work that we do with those faculty members. We enter this very intensive conceptual work period known as analysis and design, in which we specify that we have expertise in online pedagogy. We really do lean on faculty members to outline their vision for us. We then translate that vision using the sort of available toolkit that we have and the specific sort of modes of delivery that we think are best suited based on what the learning science tells us to produce a really highly effective course.
Great, thank you, David. Karina, my last question for you is, how can instructors, educators, and facilitators evaluate a learner's experience? Like, in other words, how do we know when e-learning is working?
Thanks, Natalie. So both hard and soft measures of experience are important. So let me explain what I mean with that. So at GetSmarter, we measure learners' overall experience against their expectations, their satisfaction level with support provided, and their learning community. But we also track and measure the mastery of learning outcomes linked to real-world skills. So we measure self-reported, but we also, and most importantly, track individual student progress with technology and data. So think about this. If you were to ask me, Ryan, what I watch on Netflix, I will say World War II dockies all the way.
And I know that you probably would be lying, Karina, because that's it's like me saying that I only watch educational content on TV, as I actually never watch TV.
Yeah, you're right. So if you actually go and look at my Netflix, you'll find that I've been binge watching Impractical Jokers, and that's that's the thing, right? As humans, we're notoriously good at lying, and really bad at objective assessment. And this is true for students and instructors. And technology allows us to do a real 360-degree investigation, not only into experience from a learner perspective, but also into the outcomes mastery from an instructor perspective, which David explained so eloquently earlier. So this is what our technology enables us to do. We constantly monitor and proactively track and intervene where we foresee students being at risk of not completing a course. And this is why we have such a high completion rate. We also then measure the impact of the skills mastery on our students a few months after they've completed a course, so that we can see the impact that our courses have on the lives of our students. Remember, like David said, we mostly deal with adult learners, and so that we can see how we change lives.
Great, thanks, Karina. Yeah, it's clear. I mean, it's clear to us all that the world is changing, but even clearer from this conversation how, though we've come a long way in how we think about education, I think the landscape continues to evolve, and it will have a ripple on us all. So how can we ensure, Ryan, I'm coming back to you for this one, how can we ensure that we invest in learners and help them stay prepared for the changing future of work?
Okay. Well, I mean, look, the future of work itself, like, let's think of this as pre-COVID, what the future of work has really been focused on technology, that technology is considered the most significant catalyst for change. But the reality is, by itself, it's not enough to actually produce new sources of significant value or bring out full-scale transformation for business. And in order to achieve the latter, technology, it needs to be matched with people who have uniquely human skills, so human skills that can apply the technology and direct its use in the right ways. So Natalie, you actually mentioned earlier the results of our Future of Work survey. Karina, correct me on the numbers, but over 8,000 respondents really are people who are working, kind of top execs and managers. And their responses is that even though technology is perceived to be driving change, the sought after skills were uniquely human. I mean, I'll quote the stats here. The skills that are most sought after was analytical and critical thinking. 35% of respondents said that. Interpersonal skills, over 26% of respondents said those are critical. And leadership skills, which is over 19% of respondents said that was most critical. So I think if we're preparing for the future of work, we should be teaching both the technical skills, the skills around coding, understanding artificial intelligence, understanding the technology, as well as soft skills. Like, this is a future where creative problem solving and critical thinking will be key survival skills. And I think there's a need to move towards this. And actually, if I had to flick that back and just speaking here with some of the questions I'm seeing on the side is around actually what is this move to e-learning? What does that require? It requires the technology, it requires the right platforms. I heard someone talking about Blackboard, all the different technology options that are out there, but also it requires the skills that educators have. So educators have skills, and really what we need to do, I mean, here we're talking a question around how do you discipline in the classroom? You have a skill. I know my 5-year-old son needs to be disciplined quite regularly in his classroom, and his teacher has got a unique skill that's developed over the last 20 years to do that. Now, she has to learn a new skill about how to discipline a bunch of 5-year-olds in an online environment. but the same unique personal skill of understanding discipline and understanding the motivation of a 5-year-old still applies in this environment. It just needs to be applied in a slightly different way. So technology isn't going to just be the answer. You need to bring the real world skills that educators have into this environment too. So that's how I would think the future of work, but also it's going to be the future of education as well.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you, Karina and David. This actually brings us to the end of the sort of more formal part of our discussion. And before we move on, I do want to just reflect on our poll results. We asked you what your key sentiment is right now with regards to e-learning in South Africa amid COVID-19. And the results so far are overwhelming in that most people feel the same. 67% of you believe the combination of online learning and face-to-face learning will work in South Africa. The next highest result is 18%. E-learning will be leading the future of education in South Africa. I think this feedback makes a lot of sense. I wonder if any of you have a comment around that.
Well, I'd be curious to know if that result is on account of sort of access issues that we experience, particularly in this country and other developing countries as well. I suspect that what sort of feeds into it, because often the conversation about e-learning, the upside, the downside, puts it in very categorical sort of terms. It's either you're fully online or you're sort of based in the classroom, as opposed to a combination or a spectrum, at least. And I think that, I know for myself, and I'm sure for the other people on this call, we're in this industry because we all had really, really good, impactful teachers at school. Yeah, so I'd be curious to see if that's the case.
Yeah, so I think if I'm reflecting on the polls, 4% saying e-learning and virtual classroom will never take off in SA due to the digital divide. I think what the stats are saying here that the internet penetration in South Africa is around 40% compared to the global average of over 60%, which is quite low in comparison. And the devices is also a key part of that, which I think smartphones is 51%, which is much higher than the rest of Africa, but actually lower than the average as well. So clearly access and connectivity as well as devices are key to enable people to utilize online learning. And the digital divide, the fear that we have now is that so many will not be able to access because there is no alternative. And that comes back to like in a post-COVID world, like right now we're in a crisis, but in a post-COVID world, this combination of face-to-face teaching, which is what everyone believes here, this combination. But if we can bring some of the benefits of e-learning into this, if we can bring the benefits of what we've seen in an adult education space into both primary, tertiary, and other higher education, I think then that can be the future. So I probably agree with what the majority of our respondents are saying here, that a combination is going to be the answer.
For sure. And my 2 cents, I agree with what you said, David and Ryan. And I saw one of the comments was, what does this mean for our preschool teachers and the foundation phase? And I think that's so important, because that's where this starts, teaching these skills from such a young age, skills of adaptability, resilience, soft skills, and the combination of these face-to-face and technologies, online skills. How can we from such a young phase already start using these kinds of instructions in South Africa? Yeah.
Great. Thank you, guys. I thought that I had, this speaks exactly to what David had mentioned earlier, that we come alongside the industry experts. So it's the case with this move across all sectors or all levels of education, is coming alongside teachers and their expertise and helping them translate what they do in a way that makes sense online.
So sorry, Rian, you're asking just where the stats were. It's just from a recent News 24 article. I can share the article with you. Unfortunately, something we'll share post this, where that article we got those stats from. Sorry, Natalie, I interrupted you.
No, it's all good. It's all good. David, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I saw a question that I can very quickly answer. It's from Nelson, and that's, how are exams or tests done in an e-learning environment? many options, but something that we favor in particular for working professionals is continuous assessment. Sort of practical example of that would be if you include something like a ongoing project where people sort of iteratively build on that from one part of the course to the next part of the course as well. For example, if you were doing a project management course, the final sort of project deliverable there, or course deliverable, might be a project plan, but you need to build out the work breakdown structure, the Gantt chart, and all the other elements that form part of that. And you then get sort of assessed on that formatively as the course progresses.
Cool. Some other questions coming through from Welcome. What kind of technological learning tools do you use to get smarter for teaching and learning? I think there we've developed this over the last 12 years. Really, there are lots of different tools that are available, and we've used a Moodle-based platform so that we get the benefit of some of the open source developments there. However, we built a bunch of tools on top of that that help us deliver the adult education product for universities. We've customized that over time. So we've really developed our own bespoke solution, but there are quite a number of different options that are available, and many of them are available in the freely available environment. Should we head on some of the other questions?
Yeah, go for it.
Big question from Isaiah: devices being made more affordable. This is a big question, and I'm not quite sure exactly how to answer that, but I agree with you 100%. A question here from Yannick: do you believe higher institutions are efficient in keeping up with the needs of the workforce? I think they're starting to become a lot more effective at keeping up with the needs of the workforce. And I think it's part of the online environment enables them to do that. You can more rapidly iterate and develop content, which keeps it more practical and more relevant to industry, but also getting the feedback from students. I think in the traditional environment where students come into a university and really they're treated as students, when you have more adult learners in that environment, they're giving more relevant feedback as to what works for them. One of our roles as partners to our universities is to provide them the feedback as to what is most sought after in industry, so that we can develop solutions for that. Hope that helped with that answer.
I saw another question here from Jacques. I'm trying to get
yes,
to
the e-qualifications, the credence that employers put. Yes, I also saw that one from Jacques, and I want to address it. The research that we did, actually, we asked that, Jacques, and the response was overwhelmingly clear. We asked, what do employers look for on a CV? And evidence of continued learning was overwhelmingly what they looked for on a CV. Skills-based certificates is one of the things. So over and above university degrees, job titles, they also look for pieces of information that will show that you have an aptitude to learn continuously. And e-qualifications shows that you want to learn continuously. So yes, employees do look for e-qualifications. They do put credence on it, and I think it's something like 60% of our respondents, HR managers, and people in hiring positions, who said that in the next 2 years, skills-based certificates will become increasingly more valuable on a CV.
Cool. Just to answer another question from Suzanne Stokes, just asked, can we get the reference for the stats and critical skills for the world of work? This is a gratuitous plug for our blog. You can go to our blog. There is the career guide, which basically lists all these survey results freely available to you. This question from Nelson, and maybe David, you can take that in terms of exams and tests done in the e-learning environment, because there's many ways of achieving this.
Yeah, I've answered it already, Ryan, in relation to continuous assessment, just as one way in.
Thanks, David.
Great. Are there any more questions that you guys have spotted that we have not yet addressed?
There's one in there that I think is super interesting. It's by Steph Becker. How possible is it to train soft skills online? We'd love to crack that. Yeah, we'd love to crack that. We do have soft skills and interpersonal skills courses, and it does entail some form of synchronous engagement. You can imagine if you're trying to learn the skill of negotiation, you need a practice run in some form, an authentic actual practice run as well. There's no sort of replacement for that. It's about figuring out how to harness the technology to best sort of deliver on that. And also making sure that the experience for the learner is relatively seamless, or as seamless as it can be. Yeah.
Yes, David, and I can maybe chime in there. That's also something that we assessed in the future of work and careers research that we did. We asked sentiment from employers, how actually we asked learning and development managers how well they think online learning is placed to teach, effectively teach soft skills. And I thought it's actually well placed. It's just about cracking the right tools, like you said, and designing it in the right way. But people who does this for a living do believe that online is well placed to teach soft skills. So yeah, watch the space. We'll crack it.
Can I? Sorry, I was going to say one last thing in relation to that. I think that perhaps a bit that we haven't covered is the importance of an online community and making sure that the necessary support structure is in place for learners, but for educators as well. No doubt in this move towards remote teaching and learning, university administrators are doing what they can to support faculty, but it's not quite the same as if you had like an e-learning initiative or an e-learning wing or arm, an online exec ed, for example, at your university as well, and the kind of support that you would receive then. The same is true for students. They need support, not just in terms of the sort of technical things that perhaps need to be sort of addressed in terms of their access to the platform that you're on and so forth, the learning management system, but also in terms of just like keeping them motivated and enthused sort of throughout as well. And you need to provide the space, and perhaps it's in the space of something like a forum for them to be supporting each other, because it's not just the students that are at risk who benefit from that. It's the students who get to step in and almost act as a teacher in a way, who then continue to sort of gain confidence from that engagement as well.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you guys, these were great questions. So thank you all for your posed questions. We hope that we were able to get through as many as we possibly could be, but we are coming to the end of our webinar. So again, thank you, Ryan and David and Karina. Ryan, I'm going to close off with you and ask you, as a professional, but also as a parent, your thoughts on the future of education in this COVID-19 era and beyond.
Sure, it's a big question, Natalie. I mean, maybe just reflecting on my own experience, like it's been interesting being a parent and also somebody who works in online education, like experiencing what my kids are facing right now with schools where they're trying to offer the classwork online using the medium. So, I mean, whilst I applaud the innovation and the effort and the good intention of all our educators out there, I think they're trying to manage in the time of crisis. At the same time, like I know that there are better ways of doing this. I think that online education can offer so much more than what we're seeing just with trying to take the classroom and put it into Zoom. But the educational experience need to be thoughtfully designed, and they need to be designed specifically for the online medium. So I think like to embrace online, institutions need a will to do so. And what certainly the crisis has done is it's forced that will. It's no longer a choice, it's actually a requirement. But what we're seeing is a mass move to online education, and that is going to come at the cost of quality. So what you've experienced in the classroom isn't going to be what you're going to be experiencing online. I hope that in the future, beyond this, when we do have this blended learning solution, that the educational institutions will still they'll embrace online, and hopefully some of the thoughts and experiences that we've shared can inspire those listening to drive for quality. So for all of us, and I encourage us to stay the course and not ready to give up on online just because of some initial frustrations with, figuring out the unmute button. It's really taken us 12 years to develop our approach and expertise, and we're still learning, and we're still constantly finding new ways to improve the quality of our offerings. And I think that's the same learning mindset that we should take to this medium as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Lifelong learning and the evolution continues. So thank you once again to David, Karina, and Ryan for your thoughtful and certainly thought-provoking answers. Thank you, Guardian, and of course to our audience today. We hope that this, as I said, answered some questions for you or sparked some new questions and new thinking. If you'd like to know more about GetSmarter and of course our course offering, you can visit getsmarter.com. Our blog is a great place for resources. So if you're interested in and keen for more insights and more interested in the world of online learning, that's a great place to start. Thank you all for joining us today, and I wish you a very happy Thursday and a wonderful weekend. Goodbye, everybody.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Some great questions. We had, at one point, I think I saw 400 and something people join us today. So clearly a conversation that needed to be had.
Should we end the call?
We're still live.
Okay.
We're just saying sayonara to some people, and they're saying, thank you, awesome. I really appreciate your insights. David, they're saying you're really smart, which we knew, obviously.
There are lots and lots of what looks like instructional designers and educators in here who I would love to chat with, to be honest. Really super interesting questions posed. Reach out however you can.
Yeah.
This is great. Yeah. So many good questions and really great points were raised. I've certainly learned a lot today and in the last couple of days.
Couple of months.
Lunchtime. And a big glass of water. Alrighty. You guys are more than welcome to end your video and audio, and I'll just wait for the last of the 166 people to say farewell.